stated over and over again by those who don't believe that a general can be held personally responsible for the deaths of thousands of his soldiers. We fear that understanding historical figures in the context of their respective historical periods obviously the only way to go about understanding history, but don't see why a man should be forgiven for making a mistake because this mistake is common in his time. The Battle of the Somme was to be a quick breakthrough, a way to get past the trench lines of the Western Front. No war of attrition was mentioned. That wasn't Haig's plan. His plan was to finally pass through the trenches, even though the main circumstances remained largely unchanged. We believe that Haig's mistake was to, on top of having miscalculated and misrepresented the chances of Allied success, to have continuously sent troops to what became a battle like many others. Haig sent an incredible amount of soldiers to battle, even after realizing that no breakthrough would become reality.
Thank you. Okay, so the first speaker for the opposition, please.
Let us not begin with our statements, but with the statements of noted historian Leland S. Warburton. Blaming Haig, the individual, for the failings of the British war effort is putting too much of a burden of guilt on one man. Haig was the product of his time, of his upbringing, education, training, and previous military experience. He was ultimately victorious, and even if he had been replaced, would there have been anyone better for the job? Even on the Somme, a German officer called the battlefield the muddy grave of the German army. World War I was long, and World War I was bloody. It was not going to be over by Christmas. This is fact that must be reconciled with when we discuss the casualties. The reality is that in the warfare, with this weaponry, men would die. They were engaging with the main body of the German army on the Western Front, and that no realistic alternative existed. Also, the very nature of warfare during 1914 to 1918 meant that offense was no match against a deeply entrenched defense. The weapons of defense during the First World War were much superior than the weapons of offense. Haig was not alone. Generals on all sides puzzled over this uncomfortable truth.
Good. Second for the proposition?
Should I stand up?
I think it's better to project your voice.
Haig's biggest mistake was to have actually promised to change the nature of the war. So if the nature of the war remained largely unchanged, it was because Haig was largely unsuccessful. What he promised and what he advertised with the Battle of the Somme was to have a quick breakthrough. But that surely didn't happen, and it was evident that that wouldn't happen after the first month. Even though British soldiers were still sent by thousands and thousands of soldiers, and dozens of troops were being employed in this battle that was largely a trench battle like any other. So Haig made many mistakes, and it is not reasonable to blame him for his miscalculations. But it is reasonable to blame him for what he did after the breakthrough didn't come. After the first weeks, when the battle didn't deliver what he promised, he kept sending soldiers, he kept sending people to this huge battle. All he accomplished was to increase the scale of the trench warfare. And that is just preposterous, to continue sending soldiers in a failed attempt.
Okay. Let us for one moment just briefly imagine the position that General Haig was in at the time. Due to the British being anxious about Germany having the upper hand in the war and worried about the number of French casualties from Verdun, Haig was required and pressured by politicians, by the media, by the convictions of the British public to not only hold the line, but to go out and win the war, that is, to drive the enemy and claim victory, although he knew that the British army wasn't ready. French and Germany had long had peacetime conscription for national service. So on the outbreak of war, they had a couple of million trained reservists to call on. Britain had none, and the vast civilian army that Haig led had been built up from scratch. But because of this, and as a result of the equity of manpower and industrial resources between the two sides, the clear advantage of weaponry had been bestowed upon the defender. And there was no sure path to victory, and any sort of offensive operation was bound to bring mass casualties upon the attacking forces. Now let's just take a moment. 1 in 12 soldiers commanded by Haig on the Battle of Somme died. On the German side, it was 1 in every 6. So if you had to pick a side for this battle, you were safer with the English. Now let's compare it to D-Day, which was organized by Eisenhower. More men per battalion died. Is Eisenhower a butcher? Oh, wait, wrong side. Why do we only discuss Haig and not Eisenhower or Marx Karl von Schüssel, the leader of the Germans? It is not fair to blame one man for this defeat. Other sources can be at blame. So the soldier who telephoned his good luck message, essentially warning the Germans of the impending attack. Additionally, Haig really can't be blamed for the luck or well thought out plans on the behalf of the Germans. Haig did not tell the Germans to survive the bombardment. 6 days of heavy shelling and almost 2 million shells in total really should have worked. Ludendorff, Nivelle, and Friedrichshain also lost similar numbers of manpowers for France and Germany during the fighting. Yet the only successful breakthrough during these days was by the 100 Days, which was an offensive by the British Imperial forces. The fact that the destruction was the same for many generals indicates that it is not simply an individual general who is to blame. The politicians also have equal blame, and who elected them. Lastly, let's talk about who won the war. The British did essentially win, and even Supreme Commander Foch said Haig's drive and vision were of vital importance in the critical last 100 days of war. These last 100 days of war were crucial in causing the Germans to surrender. If it wasn't for Haig's drive and vision, Britain could have conceivably lost the war, and countless more men would have died.
Okay, you can have just a moment to concur with, if you need to, with the rebuttal person before they get the opportunity to speak.
Con goes first.
You're going to go first.
How many
Isn't
minutes do we have to prepare?
No,
your
turn.
Do we have time to prepare for the rebuttal?
Just if you just have any points to add to just see what notes they've got, see if there's anything else you think we should add.
But just like making sure it's not stress.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, let's get this one. We'll see later.
Okay, so is there anything you disagree with during the rebuttal? You can say points of information and state what your challenge is. Go ahead, Kieran.
So when talking to Kobe did bring up some previous points about weapons of defense were not competent before this war, but that was actually said that he already knew what was happening. He knew that those weapons were not to be up for the war that was occurring, for the battle that was occurring. He focused plans around machinery that he knew would not work, and he knew that they would be faulty, and still focused all his plans around that. He also said he was a product of the time, but he was also known as a creator of new battle strategies of the time as well. He didn't actually have to follow all the battles that were occurring during that time and how they were to be led. He was a creator of actual strategies of that time. He was also the leaders to take responsibility of what is occurring during that battle. He was the leader of all the people in his army, and he did not lead them properly. He was irresponsible by sending people who were untrained onto battle and putting them forth, even though he knew that they were not going to fight. He knew that they were not equipped to fight this battle, and that he knew that they were not trained enough to fight the battle. That is only responsibility of him. He was the man in charge. We have to keep in mind that he was the one that was responsible. He is the leader. He was the one that called the shots. He was the one that put people forth. He was the one that.
Point of information.
Yes.
Isn't it true that General Haig actually wasn't the sole person responsible for the military actions during the Battle of the Somme?
You will find that there's other generals.
Can we
Yes.
enter as
Yes.
well?
There's also.
No, yes, it is true, and we believe that all of the people involved in the plan are largely incompetent and plainly stupid. But that doesn't mean that he cannot be called the Butcher of the Somme. We can extend the title to have the Butchers of the Somme, but he is surely one of them and one of the most responsible people for this battle.
I think it's a valid challenge and a valid rebuttal.
I can't say anything.
You can,
No.
Okay. Those arguments said that Germany had the upper hand. While knowing that there was a battle was originally to occur. It was supposed to be a quick battle. His purpose was to go into the battle, go quickly, and that changed throughout time. He realized that he was just pushing on people onto the battle and continued to push people on. It didn't become that quick battle that was going to become the point where he was going to change how the war was going the outcome of the war. Instead, turned to a battle of attrition. He started sending people off and sending people to the death that he knew that was going to occur. Because of this, he continued sending people off, and at the end, he just started killing off more people, sending people to a battle that he knew they would die to. That was irresponsible on his part to do that, because he was still sending off people when he knew it was going to occur, and he was not following his direct. It did not follow his direct plan that was going to what his plans were actually. And he is held responsible for that.
Any other points? Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, I would just like to rebut a couple of Kiara's points and just what's been stated previously. I feel like the other team, the proposition, is basically just repeating themselves, and that they feel that Haig, because there were many casualties, somehow Haig was solely to blame for this, and that many people died during the war, and we're not disputing that. Just a couple of points there. So we talked about how Haig wasn't the only general. There was actually General Rawlinson, who was the same rank as Haig, and therefore maybe he should have borne the responsibility of the death of the British soldiers as well, which, as you said, you could call them both the butchers of the Somme. So technically we could just say, yes, the Somme was a mass tragedy, and yes, many people died during the Somme, but we're kind of discussing Haig at the moment. So was Haig the butcher of the Somme, which seems to indicate that he would be the sole bringer about of the mass casualties, and he wasn't. So just launch into this. So Haig was a product of the time. He was available to the British Army. Even Lloyd George, who vehemently opposed this man, conceded that he was the best available. And it's easy to speak from the future now that these tactics were this and these tactics were that, but Haig was the best for the time. And additionally, many of these other tactics, such as cavalry, had proved to be successful in the past. You also talked about a lot how Haig somehow should have known that the equipment wasn't good. Well, if Haig had proven himself to be a good general in the past, why would he go out and somehow knowing that this would cause mass casualty, go out and just send men to die? Would that have been his strategy? Would that have been the way he wanted to win the war? No, I don't think so. And would this not be the fault of the people who equipped them and who supplied them with this? Because it's not like a general is just the highest rank ever. There were politicians who were pressuring General Haig to essentially win the war. That was what they wanted. They wanted him to win the war. And this was the way that had best proven in the past, with manpower and with cavalry, it had been proven that it would work.
Gal, do you have a point of information?
Nope. So it should also be remembered that the British never suffered anything like the losses of June 1916, when the Austro-Hungarian army had 280,000 casualties in a week, or in August 1914, when the French army lost 211,000 in 16 days, or of March and April 1918, where the Germans lost nearly 350,000 in 6 weeks, or 1915, when Russia suffered 2 million casualties in a year. And the other team has stressed how poor Haig was in updating technology. However, he wrote in his diary, this is quotes, "I inspected some of the trench mortars about 2 feet long with movable support near the muscle during the alter the elevation."
I have a point of information.
Yes.
When did we stress that he didn't update his technology?
Kiara did.
Kiara did.
Yes,
Yeah.
she did. I'm not deaf, so.
Somebody's
Maybe
getting
you're
heated.
just largely
Carry on.
misrepresenting what you hear.